From his success against the Vikings to his shaping of England's history. Stay tuned to number 1 to find out 10 facts about King Alfred the Great. Number 10. Who was King Alfred? There have been many greats in history, and yet some folks are unfamiliar with King Alfred the Great. Well, he was born in 840 AD as the 5th son of King Aethelwulf, who had ruled for 20 years as the King of Wessex, which was the land of the Anglo-Saxons, one of the dominant factions in that time period. Ironically enough, because he was the 5th son of the king, he was on the literal bottom of the totem pole in terms of being in line to rule. After all, in those times, as well as in some kingdoms nowadays, the order of your birth would determine your eligibility to wear the crown. However, fortunately for Alfred and the world at large, his brothers were all killed in Viking attacks, thus ensuring him the crown. Yet there were some other hurdles that he had to face. Mainly, one of his brothers had a son before he died, and technically, that nephew of Alfred should have gotten the crown. So what changed? Well, the Pope came in and blessed Alfred, which was a major vote of confidence back in those days. Combine that with the will of the people and you get the man who would be king. But don't think that he inherited an easy go of things, because honestly, he didn't. He inherited a kingdom that was ripe with war from the top to the bottom, and many of his legends are built upon these battles. Number 9. The last king of his nation. This title may seem a bit misleading, but I'll explain it. He was the last king of his own nation, but he wasn't the last king of his kind. Before and during the reign of King Alfred the Great, the nation that would soon be called England was under constant siege by Vikings, and Vikings were winning. England was also split into 7 separate kingdoms, which led to its own turmoil and political unrest among all of the Anglo-Saxons. During the early years of his reign, Alfred had to fight against the Vikings multiple times, barely making it through the battles alive. And many times, he had to retreat in order to protect his own people from annihilation. Eventually, it got to the point that the entire Anglo-Saxon people were conquered by the Vikings. Well, all except for Alfred the Great and his kingdom. That's really not a position you would want to be in, and it led him to rethinking his strategy as well as the armies and navies around him in order to combat the Viking threat. And combat it, he did. Which is why he most definitely wasn't the last king of his kind. Number 8. Alfred the Wise. Before we talk about the wisdom of Alfred the Great, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Zero to Hero community by using the buttons below. Many kings have come and gone in the world, and all of them have had their own take on leadership. For Alfred the Great, though, he pushed many things that most kings wouldn't have cared about. For example, he was big on education. He actually taught himself many things over his time and made sure that his people were as educated as he was in many facets. Have you ever heard the phrase, Latin is a dead language? Well, he's part of the reason for that. He didn't want Latin taught to the people, but English instead, which obviously played a big part in the world history to come. Just as important though, his education led him to be a very level-headed leader, which I'm sure many nations then and now wish they had. He was one that always tried to think clearly and rule justly. He made sure that his kingdom had what it needed in order to survive even in times of hardship. He made sure that the quality of life for his people was above the norm, or, in other words, this king didn't put himself above the people just because of his status. Number 7. Alfred the Spy. There are many, many legends about Alfred the Great, and many of them aren't true, as I'll reveal to you later. But some of them do tell a great tale about the king, including how far he was willing to go in order to get stuff done. For example, one story tells that King Alfred wanted to infiltrate an enemy Viking camp. To do so, he dressed himself up as a minstrel, or a singer that used different musical instruments to charm people, to get into the camp and get information on the soldiers. It's said that he not only had a good voice, but that he used songs that he learned while he was a young boy to charm the Vikings. And it worked. Yeah, it actually worked. He was able to stay in the Viking camp for multiple days without being noticed even once as the king that he was. Granted, you could argue that most of the Vikings probably didn't know what Alfred looked like, but this is still quite an accomplishment if it's true. And most kings wouldn't have put themselves in such danger to get information, which again proves that he viewed his life of equal value to those under his command. Number 6. From Child to Man. Upon hearing these last few entries, you might believe that King Alfred the Great was a perfect man, from top to bottom, from birth until death. but he was humble enough to admit that he wasn't even close to that. When he was young, he was a bit of a ladies' man. And not just chasing ladies of high birth, he would go after just about any woman he thought was stunning. So yeah, a bit of a player. So what happened to make him go from that into the king that was widely beloved? Well, he became king, and he found God. Alfred the Great was a very religious man, and he felt that getting the crown, which again was due in part to the Pope, was an act of God. And so if he wanted to be the king that God wanted him to be, he needed to clean up his act. His faith was a big influence on his decisions, and this actually led him to being an incredibly merciful king. So merciful, in fact, that he eventually pardoned the leader of the Vikings, Guthrum, who tried to claim England. Why? Because Guthrum decided to become a Christian. You could say that King Alfred was one of the most mature kings in all of history. Number 5. Military revolutionary. As noted previously, King Alfred had to fight an overwhelming force in the form of the Vikings, and one by one, the Anglo-Saxon nation fell, all but Alfred's. During the 870s AD, he was pushed back multiple times, only getting stalemate victories against the foes, and unable to help the other nations as they fell. So he decided that something big needed to change, and he started with the army and navy. He had a series of garrisoned and fortified sites along the edges of his kingdom, and those sites were invaluable during the battles, as the Vikings couldn't get through the sites, and thus not conquer Alfred's lands. He then looked at his army troops and tried to make sure that they could last longer periods on their own, so he made it so that the army could last in the field without having to withdraw for supplies so often, even positioning them in great spots to help other garrisons and fortresses should they need it. On the naval front, he brought in sailors to help create ships that would allow them a better advantage in the water. These fixes helped establish his protection of England, and had he not done this, the Vikings would have taken over, and the history of England would be completely different than we know of it today. His military victories and strategies were a big reason he was called Alfred the Great. Number 4. His bones are lost. If you look up the history of certain European kings and queens, you'll find that their bones weren't exactly placed in areas that were of long standing. For Alfred the Great, he was actually buried in Winchester when his life had come to an end. However, due to construction and expansion, his bones were moved on from place to place, and eventually, no one actually knew where they were. You'd think that the people of England would place a greater emphasis on a man who essentially helped make them the nation that they are, but apparently not. At present, only one bone has been found of King Alfred, a pelvic bone of all things, and it's honestly not even confirmed to be his. Number 3. The Great One. There have been many greats in history: Alexander the Great, Pompey the Great, Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, and yes, King Alfred the Great, among even more, of course. But what might surprise you is that King Alfred is in fact the only English monarch to ever have received the title of the Great. Think about that. Think about all the kings and rulers that were part of the English dynasty, and only one of them had ever gotten this moniker. That goes to show you how well respected and revered King Alfred was, as well as showing you how many in his wake, including his own son, didn't live up to his legacy in certain ways. Number 2. Successful family. In the olden days, a family legacy was just as important as the lives that we lived. For Alfred, his family before him had all but perished, including his father and brothers. But he himself was very lucky. He had 5 children, all with the same woman, Ealhswith, whom he married to get the Anglo-Saxons of the land to unite under one royal house. And it worked, for the record. As for the children, one became the abbess of a nunnery that Alfred had founded. The others were married happily to other rulers to help strengthen the ties of the nation. One of his own sons became his replacement after his passing, and this son, Edward, was said to be a good ruler. But not much is known about the second son, aside from being named after Alfred's father. Number 1. The cake story is a myth. Every ruler has that story told about him, one that is meant to show much embarrassment and prove that he or she was human. For King Alfred the Great, his story was that while fleeing from a garrison of Vikings, he had to hide in the house of a local woman. Because she had to pay off the Vikings in order to protect Alfred, she left a few loaves of bread in the oven that she had. The time it took for the Vikings to go away meant that the cakes in the oven were burnt, to which she scolded Alfred heavily. Despite this being one of the most popular stories about Alfred, it's very likely not true. if for no other reason than the story itself started in the year 1200, 300 years after the king's passing. What is your favorite part of England's history? Let us know in the comments below and take care.